Chapter 14 Night Operations Introduction. By definition, night flight is flying between the hours of sunset, end of evening civil twilight, and sunrise, beginning of morning civil twilight. During day or night, vision is the sense that makes a pilot aware of the position of the helicopter in space. The eyes can rapidly identify and interpret visual cues during daylight. During darkness, however, visual acuity is decreased proportionally as the level of illumination decreases. Night vision devices improve the capability of the human eye to see at night. Night vision goggles, NVGs, are being utilized more and more by police departments, emergency management services, and civilian pilots. This chapter covers only night flight without the use of NVGs. Instructor's objective vision is the most important sense for flying. Vision allows us to perceive our position relative to the horizon, observe our location, see and avoid obstructions, and read aircraft instruments and charts. However, in comparison to most other mammals, humans have poor vision in low light conditions. As an instructor, ensure that the student has a working knowledge of visual deficiencies and the techniques that the student can employ to overcome them. Night vision is of particular interest to the helicopter pilot because a helicopter often lands at unimproved sites with no lighting other than what the helicopter furnishes. Night flying can be overwhelming to a new student, especially when leaving the comfort of a lighted airport. Students must learn that potential hazards, such as wires, poles, and towers, become even more dangerous at night as they are not always marked or lighted. The flight profile of the helicopter is typically at a low altitude, which is where most obstacles exist. The instructor should familiarize the student with an area during daylight hours and point out all of the hazards that need to be avoided during a night flight. Another challenge for the student is manipulating the searchlight while flying. It is very easy for the student to become fixated on the light or forget to fly the helicopter while trying to place the light in the correct position. Allow the student time to become familiar with the searchlight while on the ground before attempting it in flight. Another critical issue to address when beginning night flight training is light discipline in the cockpit and how it can affect the ability to see what is around you. As a protection against damaging itself, the eye always adjusts for the brightest light level. If the helicopter's interior lights are brighter than the outside ambient light level, the eye adjusts to see the brighter inside lights, greatly limiting the ability to see outside the helicopter. The correct cockpit lighting is essential to night flying. It is important that the student has in-depth knowledge of the eye, visual acuity, and the function of rods and cones. Discuss the terms associated with night flight, including the parts and functions of the eye, visual illusions, and night scanning techniques. This information can be found in greater detail in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, the Helicopter Flying Handbook, and Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, 14 CFR, Part 91. Additionally, pilots can consult updated information for end-of-evening civil twilight, EECT, and beginning of morning civil twilight, BMCT, in the document Complete Sun and Moon Data for One Day, U.S. Cities and Towns at http://www.usno.navy.mil. Review these handbooks and regulations with the student and, when appropriate, ask the student to explain night scanning, aircraft lighting, and visual illusions. Achieving these objectives is crucial for the student when performing night flight and applying the night flight techniques. Eye anatomy and physiology. The eye is similar to a camera. The cornea, lens, and iris gather and control the amount of light allowed to enter the eye. The image is then focused on the retina, which has two types of cells, cones and rods. Figure 14.1, review the anatomy of the eye and discuss the night blind spot. Figure 14.2, this discussion should focus on vision while in flight to include visual acuity and the eye's rods and cones. The more a student knows about the eyes and how they function, the easier it is to use vision effectively and compensate for potential problems. Visual problems. There are several visual problems, or conditions, that affect night vision. Discuss with the student the visual deficiencies, such as myopia, night myopia, hyperopia, astigmatism, and presbyopia. Refer the student to the Helicopter Flying Handbook for in-depth definitions of each visual problem and how each can affect night flying. Instructors should be aware of any specific visual problems that the student may have that could affect his or her ability to fly at night. For example, if the student wears glasses, are the glasses reflecting glare from an unnecessary light? Do the glasses have a coating that interferes with night vision? Does the student wear sunglasses during the day to protect night vision? If the student is older, has he or she been screened for cataracts, which could cause night vision problems? The instructor must teach the student about all possible visual problems but also be aware of any that the student may have. Ground instruction in a classroom environment. Review all terms associated with night operations. Explain to the student how to protect night vision, how to recognize self-imposed stress, the negative effects on night vision from smoking, and the various scanning techniques for night flight. It is also important that visual illusions are explained in detail with information regarding how to detect and react to the illusions. Aircraft instruments are easier to read under higher levels of interior illumination. However, this need must be balanced with the ability to see outside and the hazard of interior lights reflecting off the interior surfaces. Minimize interior lighting, whenever possible, without hindering reading of essential instruments. Night vision protection. Explain to the student that protecting night vision should always be a priority. Discuss some of the steps to take to protect night vision, such as the use of sunglasses and oxygen. Repeated exposure to bright sunlight has an increasingly adverse effect on dark adaptation. Point out that this effect is intensified by reflective surfaces, such as sand and snow. Sunglasses aid in filtering the bright sunlight and increase the rate of dark adaptation at night while improving night visual sensitivity. Figure 14.3. Explain to a student that unaided night vision depends on optimum function and sensitivity of the rods of the retina. Lack of oxygen to the rods significantly reduces their sensitivity and increases the time required for dark adaptation, as well as decreases the ability to see at night. Since most helicopters do not carry oxygen, more practical advice to give a student who smokes is either to quit or at least reduce the amount that they smoke, and advise that physical conditioning helps not only the heart, but also assists the body's ability to increase oxygen intake. If oxygen is available, pilots should use it when flying above a pressure altitude of 4,000 feet. Additional precautions to discuss with the student pertain to the airport or heliport lighting. Any light sources that may impair the student's dark adaptation should be eliminated. Tell the student to try to select departure routes that avoid highways and residential areas where artificial light can impair night vision. If bright lights are encountered from a specific direction, turn the aircraft away from the light source when able. If this is not possible, instruct the student to preserve dark adaptation by shutting one eye and using the other to observe. Once the light source is no longer visible, the eye that was closed can provide the required night vision. Self-imposed stress. Night flight is more fatiguing and stressful than day flight because the brain has to work harder in order to make sense of the limited visual cues or the lack of visual acuity. The pilot must scan more in order to gain sufficient visual cues to maintain the desired flight path. Many helicopters are not well equipped for night flight. Most charts and maps are harder to read and interpret in low levels of light. Inform the student of several self-imposed stressors that limit night vision, such as drugs, illness, fatigue, alcohol, and tobacco. For example, if an individual smokes 3 cigarettes in rapid succession or 20 to 40 cigarettes within a 24-hour period, the physiological effect at ground level is the same as flying at 5,000 feet. More importantly, the smoker has lost about 20% of night vision capability at sea level. Review the pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge with the student to ensure a better understanding of these types of stressors and place emphasis on the fact that the student can control this type of stress. Scanning techniques. It is important to teach the student various night vision techniques that enable him or her to overcome many of the physiological limitations of their eyes. These techniques require considerable practice and concerted effort on the part of the student and the instructor, as they are important in identifying objects at night. Instruct the student that to scan effectively, looking from right to left or left to right. Tell the student to begin scanning at the greatest distance an object can be perceived, top, and move inward toward the position of the aircraft, bottom. Figure 14.4, for each stop, an area approximately 30 degrees wide should be scanned. The duration of each stop is based on the degree of detail that is required, but no stop should last longer than 2 to 3 seconds. When moving from one viewing point to the next, the student should overlap the previous field of view by 10 degrees. Viewing an object using central vision during daylight poses no limitation. If this same technique is used at night, however, the object may not be seen because of the night blind spot that exists during low illumination. Explain to the student that in order to compensate for this limitation, he or she can use off-center vision. This technique requires that an object be viewed by looking 10 degrees above, below, or to either side of the object. In this manner, the peripheral vision can maintain contact with an object. Ensure that the student understands that, with off-center vision, the images of an object viewed longer than 2 to 3 seconds disappear. This occurs because the rods reach a photochemical equilibrium that prevents any further response until the scene changes. This produces a potentially unsafe operating condition. To overcome this night vision limitation, the student must be aware of the phenomenon and avoid viewing an object for longer than 2 or 3 seconds. The peripheral field of vision continues to pick up the object when the eyes are shifted from one off-center point to another. Figure 14.5, visual illusions. Decreasing visual information increases the probability of spatial disorientation. Ensure the student understands that reduced visual references also create several illusions that can induce spatial disorientation. Many types of visual illusions can occur in flight, and it is important that the student becomes familiar with the various types to include. Flickr Vertigo. Much time and research have been devoted to the study of Flickr Vertigo. A light flickering at a rate between 4 and 20 cycles per second can produce unpleasant and dangerous reactions. Such conditions as nausea, vomiting, and vertigo may occur. On rare occasions, convulsions and unconsciousness may also occur. Flickr vertigo is why the regulations allow pilots to disable the strobe lights and anti-collision beacons while flying in the clouds. Fixation occurs when pilots ignore orientation cues and fix their attention on a goal or an object. This is dangerous because helicopter ground closure rates are difficult to determine at night. False horizons. Cloud formations may be confused with the horizon or the ground. While hovering over terrain that is not perfectly level, the pilot might mistake the sloped ground in front of the helicopter for the horizon and cause the helicopter to drift while trying to maintain a stationary position. Another example is a lighted road climbing a mountainside can easily be mistaken for a flat horizon. Confusion with ground lights. A common occurrence is to confuse ground lights with stars. When this happens, the pilot unknowingly positions the helicopter in unusual attitudes to keep the ground lights, believed to be stars, above them. Figure 14.6, Relative motion. The illusion of relative motion can be illustrated by an example. A pilot hovers a helicopter and waits for hover taxi instructions. Another aircraft hovers alongside. As the other aircraft is picked up in the first pilot's peripheral vision, the pilot senses movement in the opposite direction. Altered planes of reference. When approaching a line of mountains or clouds, the pilot may feel the need to climb despite adequate altitude. Also, when flying parallel to a line of clouds, pilots may feel that they need to climb even though their altitude is adequate. Structural illusions. These illusions are caused by heat waves, rain, snow, sleet, or other factors that obscure vision. For example, a straight line may appear to be curved when seen through a desert heat wave, or a wingtip light may appear to double or move when viewed during a rain shower. Height and depth perception illusion. Due to lack of visual references when flying over desert, snow, water, or other areas of poor contrast, the pilot may experience the illusion of being higher above the terrain than is actually the case. This illusion may be overcome by dropping an object, such as a chemical light stick or flare, on the ground before landing. Another technique used to overcome this illusion is to monitor shadows cast by nearby objects, such as the skid shadows at a hover. Flight in an area where visibility is restricted by haze, smoke, or fog produces the same illusion. Size-distance illusion results from viewing a source of light that is increasing or decreasing in luminance brightness. The pilot may interpret the light as approaching or retreating. Autokinesis. When the pilot stares at a static light in the dark, the light appears to move. This phenomenon can be readily demonstrated by staring at a lighted cigarette in a dark room. Apparent movement begins in about 8 to 10 seconds. Although the cause of autokinesis is not known, it appears to be related to the loss of surrounding references that normally serve to stabilize visual perceptions. This illusion can be eliminated or reduced by visual scanning, by increasing the number of lights, or by varying the light intensity. The most important of the three solutions is visual scanning. You should not stare at a light or lights for more than 10 seconds. This illusion is not limited to light in darkness. It can occur whenever you stare at a small, bright, still object against a dull, dark or nondescript background. Similarly, it can occur when a small, dark, still object is viewed against a light, structureless environment. Anytime visual references are not available, pilots are subject to this illusion. Instructors can also relate this illusion to the helicopter's landing light. It becomes very easy to focus on that one beam of light and not see the peripheral vision cues of lateral or rotating movement. Staring into the landing light also tends to ruin much of the accumulated night vision, leaving the pilot nearly blind when the landing light is extinguished. Reversible perspective illusion. At night, an aircraft may appear to be moving away when it is, in fact, moving toward a second aircraft. This illusion often occurs when an aircraft is flying parallel to another's course. To determine the direction of flight, air crews should observe aircraft lights and their relative position to the horizon. If the intensity of the lights increases, the aircraft is approaching. If the lights dim, the aircraft is moving away. Also, remembering the 3 rupees helps identify the direction of travel when other aircraft are encountered. If the red aircraft position lights are on the right, the aircraft is returning, coming toward the observer. Figure 14.7. Flight instruction. Students should receive adequate ground instruction and classroom training prior to advancing to actual flight training. Proper classroom instruction ensures that students are aware of the limitations of night flight and helps ensure a safer operating environment. Once the student has shown proficiency and is comfortable with the demands of night flight, the actual night flying can successfully commence. Pre-flight inspection. The aircraft pre-flight inspection is a critical aspect of safety, and it must comply with the appropriate aircraft operator's manual. Pre-flight should be scheduled as early as possible, preferably during daylight hours, allowing time for maintenance assistance if necessary. If a night pre-flight is necessary, a flashlight with an unfiltered lens should be used to supplement lighting. Oil and hydraulic fluid levels and leaks are difficult to detect with blue, green, or red lens. Windscreens must be checked to ensure they are clean and relatively free of scratches. Slight scratches are acceptable for day but may not be acceptable for night flight. The searchlight or landing light should be positioned for the best possible illumination during an emergency descent. Also included in pre-flight planning, the student should be tasked with deciding how to read the checklist and charts at night. Cockpit organization is a very important chore that must be accomplished before flight. The instructor could have an auxiliary power unit, APU, or power cart connected to the helicopter at night so the student can practice cockpit organization. Small items can become large problems if a flashlight is dropped and blocks the flight controls, or a map or checklist is left on the dashboard and blocks the windscreen. The student must learn how to manage a flashlight, map, and checklist while flying at night. Instructors should review the heliport and airport lighting with the student to include beacons. Since helicopters do not normally use runways, the low blue intensity of airport taxiway lighting should be pointed out. Teach the student that some obstructions around the airport may be lighted but some may not. Pilots should always be looking for windsock poles, light poles, ACES/AWOS installations, and other off-runway obstacles. Many of these hazards should be pointed out during the day flights and then again during the night, especially the ones that are not lighted. The student should be prompted to begin developing a hazard map of the area and shown how to properly keep it updated. Proper preparation of the helicopter for night flight contributes greatly to the success of the flight. However, you should stress to the student that, unless he or she is physically and mentally prepared to participate in the night flight, the flight is considered unsafe. Discuss the following checklist with the student prior to flight to ensure readiness. Dark. Adapt before flight. Avoid self-imposed stress. Avoid bright sunlight during the day. Learn to use the principles of night vision. Avoid all bright lights after dark. Adaptation. Participate in frequent night flights to ensure the student can demonstrate the tasks listed below to a satisfactory level. Pre-flight and aircraft lighting. Proper cockpit lighting, engine starting, rotor engagement, if installed, taxi, takeoff, en route procedures, specific night emergencies, light failure, alternator failure, loss of orientation, inadvertent IFR, collision avoidance, approach and landing. Each instructor must determine what type of night training is best for each particular student based on that student's learning style and understanding. It is beneficial to require portions of training with and without aircraft lighting and training with night vision devices, when necessary. Ensure that the training is always based on the appropriate rotorcraft flight manual, RFM, of the particular helicopter being flown, and that the training is tailored to the individual's needs. Remember, a successful training session depends on adequate support such as flight hours, equipment, and training areas. See Figure 14.8 for a sample lesson plan. Training should begin in high ambient light levels, such as a full moon, and progress to successively lower light levels. Students should first perform maneuvers to prepared surfaces. As proficiency increases, allow the student to progress to lighted sites and then to unlighted sites. Navigation training should begin with easy routes. As the student becomes more proficient, he or she can fly routes with legs of 50 to 100 nautical miles. More difficult and realistic scenarios should have possible landing areas interspersed along the route. Communication with the student and actions, sequence or timing, are necessary for students to perform flight tasks efficiently, effectively, and safely. If a particular task is labor-intensive and requires additional time from the student, assist in performing that task until the student's confidence and understanding is achieved. Specific night flight emergencies, such as light failure, alternator failure, and loss of orientation by either too much information over a broad metropolitan area or too few lights over open country, should be discussed, practiced, and evaluated. Depending on the student's status and progress, the first few night flights should be short to allow the student time to adjust and absorb all the new information. Students have a tendency to tire very quickly when starting night training, and it is the job of the instructor to prevent the student from getting to that point, as fatigue is detrimental to training. As the student acclimates to the environment, training times can be lengthened to facilitate training. Note: discuss with the student that controlled flight into terrain seems to be the major fatal error made by pilots, particularly during night flights. Therefore, the student must understand that anything that casts a shadow or appears to be blocking lights, natural or man-made, should be treated as an obstacle. If weather conditions fall below 1,000 feet and 3 miles while attempting to fly VFR at night, particularly during training, cancellation of the flight would be a wise decision. This also shows the student's sound decision making, and hopefully that student will carry that forward with him the rest of his flying career. Also, the weather may be greater than a 1003 but no ambient light is visible, no stars are visible. In this case, if VFR night flight is accomplished, use a higher en route altitude, minimum safe altitude from VFR chart. If the weather temporarily limits visibility, such as a strong rainstorm, day or night, teach the student to land the helicopter and wait for the weather to pass. Discuss flying at lower airspeeds during limited visibility, as well as the development of IMC conditions, such as fog or condensation. If your visual field suddenly becomes blurry, or difficult to see, it is usually because the weather is changing. This should be an excellent cue to make a decision about aborting the flight. Teach the student that simply flying direct from one point to the next is fine for day VFR. However, night flights demand more attention to navigate successfully. Using distant towns, towers, or any other lit object is acceptable during night flights. Major roads with traffic also provide a means to navigate during hours of darkness. Remind the student of the blue maximum elevation figures that are published on the sectional charts and their importance in night route planning. If the flight is planned to be above the maximum elevations, all obstructions should be cleared by a reasonable margin. Proper flight planning can truly save a life or lives. If the helicopter is IFR equipped and the student is IFR rated, then teach the student IFR recovery techniques. Instructor tips: ensure that the student can recognize and understands the visual deficiencies. Ensure the student has a basic understanding of the anatomy and physiology of the eye. Point out visual illusions to the student during flight, when possible. Discuss with the student the inability to see weather phenomena while flying at night. Discuss how unusual attitudes are harder to detect at night without the normal visual references. If corrective lenses are prescribed to aircrew members, they must use corrective lenses, glasses, in all modes of flight. Be aware that it will take 30 to 45 minutes for the average individual's eyes to reach maximum dark adaptation. Use off-center vision when viewing objects under reduced lighting conditions. Avoid self-imposed stress. Protect night vision by avoiding bright lights once dark adaptation has been achieved. Scan using a series of short, regularly spaced eye movements between being still for a second at a time. Chapter summary: this chapter described the basic anatomy and physiology of the eye. Night flying and visual illusions were explained, and how a pilot can overcome them while in flight. Various techniques were described to teach the student safer ways to conduct flight at night. Instructors should ensure that the student has a basic understanding of the requirements and common problems associated with night flying.